Previously
have
on.
these military parades, and so now America is going to do so to show our might and power.
Right? Do we
We are.
really need to have these phallic contests
I know, right?
around the globe? Mine's bigger than yours. No, yours is bigger than mine. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's
That's
such
a
an
male
embarrassment.
thing. You know it, and so do I. That's a male thing,
Absolutely.
and it's time to give it up. It's the whole thing is just absolutely ridiculous.
I was
But we
I was gonna make a really bad joke. I was gonna say, well, if that's really
don't
the
do
case,
that.
well, then we should have a military parade in Africa. But anyway, let's move forward.
Right.
Previously, on Unmasking the Invisible, we embarked on a powerful journey with Dr. Jacqueline Battalora and Jane Elliott. Dissecting the intricate layers of white privilege and systemic racism, we uncovered how whiteness was deliberately constructed, not a natural occurrence, creating legal and social advantages for some while disadvantaging others. We confronted the uncomfortable truths of how these systems operate, often invisibly, within our institutions. We examined the misuse of religion to justify oppression and the loaded symbolism embedded in our language and structures, like the very name White House. And we emphasized the crucial role of education and critical thinking in dismantling these deeply entrenched systems. Knowledge is power, as we learned, and silence is complicity. We examined the misuse of religion to justify oppression and the loaded symbolism embedded in our language and structures, like the very name White House, and we emphasized the crucial role of education and critical thinking in dismantling these deeply entrenched systems. Knowledge is power, as we learned, and silence is complicity. But the journey doesn't end there. The story continues, and in this second part, we delve even deeper. Battalora and Elliott take us beyond the historical foundations and into the contemporary manifestations of white privilege. We're just scratching the surface. They remind us, as they unpack the subtle yet pervasive ways systemic racism operates in our modern world. Prepare to confront the complexities of allyship, the challenges of dismantling internalized biases, and the crucial, actionable steps needed to forge a truly equitable future. The time for change is now, and this second part provides even more insights and tools to make that change a reality. Don't miss a beat as we continue to unravel the complexities of race and inequality.
Deeper, if you could, because you're absolutely right. We don't talk about that enough.
But Christianity has been used to keep black people down for 2,000 years. And in this country, not 2,000 years, but in this country for 500 years, we have used Christianity to keep black people in their place. While we, which just kills me. Did you enjoy Christmas cards? Did you get Christmas cards with a picture of the Holy Family on it? There's Mary with her blonde hair, and her pale skin and her blue eyes. And there's the little baby Jesus looking just like the little Pillsbury Doughboy. Now, that isn't the way it happened. She was Jewish. She was born in the Middle East. Her hair was dark. Her skin was dark and her eyes were dark. And in the Bible, it says Jesus had feet of bronze and kinky woolly hair. Now, next Christmas, if you get Christmas cards, go down and buy a box of Christmas cards with the picture of the Holy Family on it. Take it home and color them right, and then send them out. You won't have to send any Christmas cards the next year because nobody will want to receive a Christmas card from you, because that is heresy, no doubt. People, you need to know that Moses, God is not an old white man with a long gray beard that looks like Charlton Heston playing Moses. God is a spirit and has neither gender nor color, but God is made male because males wrote the Bible because females weren't allowed to learn to read and write. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing is just ridiculous. And it belongs, if you haven't read Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Browder, you better get it and read it, because
Anthony Browder, shout out. Absolutely.
Oh, my shout out for Browder. He's absolutely brilliant. Blacks were doing cataract surgery with metal instruments before they even thought of such a thing in the UK and in Europe. We don't realize those things because we've never been taught those things. If you're going to teach Black history, you'd have to start 4,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. You can't start with slavery. But in this country, that's when we start teaching Black history. It's when we decided that they were slaves. And incidentally, I laugh every time I hear somebody say, our first Black president, Barack Obama. Well, Abraham Lincoln was our first Black president. He was part Black, part white, and part Cherokee Indian. He was a Melungeon. Do you think if people had been as angry about that kind of thing at the time of the Civil War that he would have been made president? People knew then. But since then, we have tried to deny that or ignore it. So we don't teach history. We teach insanity on a daily basis.
Did you believe the historical autopsy of white privilege in our previous discussion was a neat, contained narrative? That understanding the legal architecture and societal constructs meant we'd neatly packaged and shelved the issue? If so, prepare to be disabused of that notion, because the tendrils of the past, far from receding, weave themselves into the very fabric of our present, casting shadows that are both long and insidious. We're not merely revisiting the past, we're confronting its persistent, haunting presence. In our first exploration, we dissected the blueprints of inequality, the calculated legal frameworks, the distorted religious justifications, the very nomenclature of power. But as Jane Elliott so incisively reminds us, you can't see the water you're swimming in. We're now venturing into the depths of that unseen current, where the subtle yet pervasive forces of systemic racism continue to shape our reality. We moved beyond the why of systemic racism and now grapple with the how. How does this deeply entrenched system continue to operate, often cloaked in invisibility? How do we transcend mere awareness and embark on the demanding journey of active intervention? Because, as we must acknowledge, silence is complicity. We cannot remain passive observers in the face of ongoing injustice. This isn't a call to wallow in guilt. It's a summons to embrace responsibility, to recognize that white privilege isn't a relic of a bygone era, but a dynamic force that shapes our daily lives, our opportunities, our very sense of belonging. We must also delve into the fraught terrain of allyship, not the performative, self-congratulatory kind, but the messy, demanding, real kind. We must confront the insidious nature of internalized biases, those subtle yet potent prejudices that even the most well-intentioned among us harbor because, let's face it, we're all works in progress. Admitting our imperfections, our blind spots, is the indispensable first step towards genuine transformation. And let us not shy away from the profound deception of the white Jesus. The appropriation of a spiritual figure, originally from the Middle East, into a symbol of white supremacy is a masterstroke of cultural manipulation. This image, disseminated through centuries of colonial power, serves to reinforce the notion of white moral authority, subtly justifying oppression and domination. The white Jesus becomes a tool of control, a silent enforcer of racial hierarchy, perpetuating a theological justification for systemic inequality. It is a profound manipulation of spiritual iconography, used to maintain power structures. Their voices, their experiences, their realities, they matter. This isn't about centering our own narratives. It's about amplifying the voices of those who have been systematically marginalized. It's about creating a world where race no longer dictates destiny, where the color of one's skin doesn't determine access to opportunity, dignity, or justice. And that transformation begins with understanding, with active listening, with unwavering commitment to action. This is not a comfortable conversation. It's a confrontation with the uncomfortable truths that lie at the heart of our society, but it's a necessary confrontation. If you're ready to move beyond the superficial, if you're prepared to confront the uncomfortable realities, if you're committed to being a catalyst for change, then join us, because the time for change is now, and it begins right here, right now, with a willingness to see, to understand, and to act.
Wow. Okay. So I would be remiss if I don't go even deeper into this conversation, especially in terms of how America is getting ready to is going through a transformation and being reshaped and reformed with the differences in melanated population versus a non-melanated population. So, and I'm gonna reach out to you, Jane Elliott, for this, because this is a question of someone that was pivotal around in the time that you were doing the work that you were doing with the Brown Eye, Blue Eye experience. I think it was 1985. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, the author of the ISIS papers, who was the one who talked about the genetic annihilation, and she went on Donahue. And she said, you know, if everyone loved each other, she said, this is the reason why Martin Luther King was assassinated. She said, if everybody loved each other, Europeans, white people would cease to exist because of the dominant gene of the male sperm. Your thoughts on that, as well as understanding, you know, the label of race and the creation of race, but your thoughts on that in terms of genetic annihilation.
Well, number one, I have a problem with love. Bell Hooks said, "We will not have a loving society until we have a just one." If you say you love me, but don't treat me justly, I won't treat you justly, and we won't end up loving one another. Bell Hooks says justice has to come first. And Dwight Eisenhower said, you can't legislate love. but we could legislate justice. I think if people of different color groups were allowed to reproduce, that we would have a mosaic society, which is what we have, and it would be largely non-white. That's the way it is. That is simply the way it is. However, when you were, by law, it was decreed that it was illegal for you to have relations with a person of another color group. That was racism in itself, and we're still doing that same thing. We're getting away from it, but not entirely, not in small towns all over the United States. You are seen as less than if you love someone who doesn't look like you, or who doesn't worship like you, who isn't as educated as you are. These are not examples of loving society, nor of a just society. These are examples of a bigoted society, and they've done studies that prove that the longer you spend in school, unless you really think about it, the more bigoted you become, because the more you are reinforced in the things that you learn K through 12.
Wow.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. That's amazing. That's a good stat.
Well, yeah, we'll take a look at it. And I can't remember where I read that, but those are the studies that we have studies that prove that. And you look at someone like a Stephen King from Iowa, who says that he said no colored people have ever made contributions to civilization. Practically all the contributions to civilization were made by people who were other than white. And we don't want to recognize that, and we don't want to admit it, and we certainly don't want to glorify it. We have to pretend that white is right. If you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, hang around. If you're black, get back. And if you're red, you're dead. And that's the way we teach in this country, and that's the way we educate in this country. That's not education. That's indoctrination. When we stop indoctrinating and start educating, we can turn this thing around. Now, hopefully, we will do that with the next group. I don't think the millennials are that just yet. I don't think the millennials are that unprejudiced. I think if the millennials had been that unprejudiced, we would not have this man for president. Right. Because they would have come out in droves and voted for anybody but this fool. But they didn't. However,
well, let's talk about that, Jane. We'll pack it even deeper. Talk about the 45th. Now, you have the only thing that I would say is remotely similar to you and the 45th is the ability to nickname people. What is your nickname for this 45th? May I ask?
44 and a half.
44. I just absolutely. This is why we're going to vote for Jane Elliott for president in 2020. This is a setup right here, family. We're going to actually try to get this woman in. Okay,
look,
so you have a
here's the problem.
Rex, what is your nickname for Trump?
Dinosaurus T. Rump. Because he acts like a dinosaur, like Tyrannosaurus Rex. He has a face that looks like a rump, and I won't finish it because you'll just have to figure out the rest for yourself. But he has a mouth that looks like an anal aperture.
You can only imagine what I have to go through.
He outgushes excrement. Dinosaurus T. Rump speaks excrementally.
Wow. Why don't you tell us how you really feel about the guy, Jane? I'm just saying, maybe you're holding back just a tad bit.
Well, he and I are both white, and I know white folks.
Well, that's deep. Go deeper if you would. I love that. That's great. So, of course, the comment about the shithole countries. And wanting to bring more people from what was it, Norway?
The countries from which we all came. That's what he's talking about. When he calls them shithole countries, he's talking about the countries in which humanity began.
His own ass he's talking about.
He's talking about.
Well, this guy didn't know Frederick Douglass was alive or dead, so I'm not really going to hold much for him to go that deep. I'm just saying.
I loved it when he said that Frederick Douglass is doing some wonderful things. That was last summer that he said that. I fell out laughing.
Maybe he meant metaphysically. I don't know, but I'm sure as hell not sure.
When he held up when he held up the Bible and said, I know the Bible, in 2 Corinthians it says, and I fell out laughing because I thought 2 Corinthians walked into a bar. The whole thing is just so ignorant.
I think this show is going to go viral, people. This will be the diversity model for everyone in diversity. This will be the show that you must watch. If you're going to train and teach anybody, this is the one. Okay.
Look, I'm 84 years old. I'm 84 years old. I've lived through things that Dinosaurus T. Rump didn't live through. He was born 14 years after I was. He was born after the Second World War. He didn't see the commercials. He didn't see the newscasts of Jews who were nothing but skeletons being released from the concentration camps. He didn't see those things. He didn't have to. We had to. My father was old enough to go to the military, and he wanted to go, and he couldn't go because we had 5 children, and then my mother had 2 more, so that she could keep him from going into the military. We watched people leave and not come back. We saw the gold stars replace the silver and white stars on the board, on the wall of the building downtown, so that you knew who was still there and who was dead in a war that we didn't have to fight. He doesn't remember when President Roosevelt, when somebody said, what do you, he said, leave that man alone. He's dealing with a problem that the rest of us don't want to deal with. He doesn't know any of those things because he doesn't read, and he doesn't have to think because he can pay somebody else to do his thinking for him. And that's true for many, many people in this country. We don't read, and we are becoming less and less intelligent. Well, not less intelligent, but less knowledgeable, because now we have those cell phones and those video games and television. And it is my contention that if you put a child in front of a television for 2 months who isn't a racist, at the end of 2 months, you'll have a racist, sexist person on your hands. And then you'll have to undo what television has done to them. We aren't careful about what we feed into our children, and we will suffer for it. You will suffer for it because you're younger than I am. I won't suffer for it. I'll be gone if you're lucky. But I intend to live at least as long as.
That would be a sad day. That's going to be a sad day.
So
yeah, I'm going to tell you that right now.
But you will have to deal with that which we are creating right now. And I don't think you're going to like it.
No.
When we talk about this new generation, well, let me ask you this. You made mention earlier, Jane, in passing, because we're talking about the whole purpose of this show was talking about white privilege and to demystify that and get your viewpoints on it. But you said you had went to the white privilege conference and you said you'd never do that again. Walk us through that if you could. What did you mean by white privilege? You didn't like the white privilege conference?
The author of the list of white privileges stood up and read, and it was in a gymnasium in Pella, Iowa, in the school. And it was on a Saturday, and the author of the list of white privileges, Peggy McIntosh, stood up and began to read her list of white privileges. About a third of the members of that audience were black. By the time she had read the first 5, ignore that. By the time she'd read the first 5, just a minute, please. I'm busy, call later. The people of color.
Only Jane Elliott can.
I love you. I'm telling you. I just look. T.I. and Killer Mike. They say they love you, but I think I love you more than Killer Mike and T.I. I'm almost certain of that.
What would you do in that situation?
But I'm just saying. Okay, go ahead, Jane.
Okay. Anyway, so by the time she had finished the first 5, the blacks began to get a bit restive. By the time she had finished the first 10, reading these things that say, because of my race, because of my race, because of my race, they had begun to leave. By the time she got to the 25th one, most of them had gone. And now she said, I have discovered 14 more privileges that I have because of my race. And I looked around, and practically all the blacks were gone. And I thought, well, Jane, the intelligent people have left. What the hell are you doing here? And I got up and left because it was offensive to me, and it should have been offensive to everyone else. I'm busy. You'll have to call back. It should have been offensive to every white person in that room. Should have gotten up and left.
Wow.
But you see, it was making them feel good. look at here, we are here and we're still listening because we want to learn, because we're hearing something that makes us feel good and gives us ever more advantages. They stayed and listened. I couldn't stay and listen to that when my black cousins were being offended and insulted once again, told that they couldn't ever be in the same position the white folks are because of their race. There's only one race. I think she didn't know at that time that there was only one race. If she had, she'd have said because of the color of my skin. And then it would have been totally ridiculous, because she would have been saying it makes sense to judge people by the amount of melanin in their skin. It doesn't make sense.
Dr. Jacqueline Battlora.
Well, you know, this is a reminder for me of that context is everything. Because if you and I wasn't there in Iowa for this, but I know if you read Peggy McIntosh's entire article that is unpacking the invisible knapsack,
okay, get over it.
Then she makes it very clear that she is presenting this list, like where it came from and how she came to the realization, and that it was in contrast to how she saw the women of color with whom she worked in this women's studies program be treated. And she saw in contrast that when she spoke, people would listen. When the woman of color would speak, they were not conferred that sort of respect. When Peggy McIntosh would write a grant proposal, she knew the whiteness and what it wanted, and so she could shape it and was far more likely to be successful. So when you have the bigger context, I think that Peggy McIntosh's list of white privileges, in that with that context being very clear, can be powerful, and a motivator to get people invested, white people in particular, invested in learning this sort of knowledge about colorism, about systemic white supremacy, etc. And so it reminded me actually of, Jane, I think you'll appreciate this. I tried to see if I couldn't get people to utilize humor as a mechanism to raise awareness of white supremacy. And so I was thinking, let's do it and use, like, remember, was it Johnny Carson or who did the top 10 list every night? Letterman. David Letterman. So with a, top 10 reasons it's great to be white. So if you do that, if a non-white person is reading that list, it was received in a way that was comedic. It retained its comedic intent. But you have
Let me ask you something, Dr. Battlora. Not to interrupt you. Not to interrupt you, but I'm going to interrupt you.
That's all right.
Let me interrupt you for a moment. Are we? And this is kind of an understanding of what Jane is talking about.
Yeah.
Are we doing a little bit too much to try to get white people to wake up that are just not ready to wake up? I mean, if I launched the Black Privilege Conference, I think Jane would actually come speak at that. But I mean, actually, that might be a great idea. But are we just kind of working a little bit too hard here to get people to listen and learn when, in some ways, it's not? Is it really necessary to go to those levels and lengths to try and dispel their cognitive dissonance?
Well, you know what? Here's what I think. I think I have a yes and a no to that, because I believe that, like, this either or approach that is so, we are so dualistic in this, your Western European society is dualistic. It's just been part of our frame for shaping our brains since the Enlightenment. And so I really reject the either or approach. I mean, you think about Frederick Douglass in his debates over, what do Black people need, and he was advocating for access in higher education. And you had Garvey, who was promoting training in vocational training, as if Black people didn't need both and. Like, it's a false dichotomy. And so I believe that there are a variety of different approaches. Not everybody gets to be in a classroom with Jane Elliott. If we could do that, my hope for the future of this globe would be transformed like this. But because that's not the case, people bring a variety of gifts in terms of how they open up people's ability to learn and ability to change. And I know for me that some of the ways people have wanted me to repackage my work so that it can become accessible to Breitbart, I am not interested. I am not interested, right? But some people, white people and white people who have these ideals, maybe they can. And I don't, look, there are a variety of ways to get us that are ethical, and I should undergird that are ethical to get, to help people transform their hearts and minds. And I think having a wide variety with that purpose, if it's ethical, is a really good thing. Now, I would benefit probably most from being in a Jane Elliott approach. I think it's amazing, but the fact of the matter is not everybody gets to go through that process, to be in her exercise and hear her quick wit, her knowledge of the wealth of things that she's read, the history that she's lived. Jane, if we could multiply, make you multiply, great. But until we can do that, we need a variety of approaches.
Jane Elliott, let me ask you this. One of the things that we say in the community, and one of the reasons why we are very suspect, even particularly there are people who say, why would you have Jane Elliott and Dr. Battlora on your show? You should have all Black people on your show. One of the questions that we talk about and have conversations in our community, and that is, can the people who have done us historically the most harm do us absolutely any good? And so we really have to ask that question, and that question, not too many people get a chance to ask that question to historians and scholars in the well, you don't want to call it diversity, but I guess the white awareness industry. I don't know what the hell we're going to call it. But what do you say to that, Jane? Why should people of color trust anything that people of non-melanated people, European Americans and Europeans, why should we listen to anything that you guys have to say?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't trust me. I'm a white woman. Right. I was raised a white woman. I was taught to be a racist. I was systematically conditioned to the myth of my superiority as a white person, but not really superior because I was still just a woman. But at least I was a white woman. So no, you shouldn't trust me. But you need to know that everything I know, I have learned from reading or talking to people of other color groups. I can't learn about people of other color groups because they don't choose to be in my presence. And they aren't. And for the first 18 years of my life, I was never in the presence of a person who was other than white. So I'm an ignorant white woman. You shouldn't trust me. But because I have learned a whole lot from listening to and watching and living for the last 84 years, I may have some knowledge because of what I've learned from Black people that most white people don't have because they haven't looked for it. It's there. All you have to do is go to the nearest bookstore and you go down the line, and when you want to, if you're going down through the romance section, you'll find that the white romances have the full picture on the front of the book displayed on the shelf. But when you come to the Black section, all you see are the spines of the books. Just that one little thing is just a scream. And I stand there, I've done this in Walden Books, and stood there and laughed because here it is. Here we can't have a Black woman and a Black man and a Black woman, or a Black man and a white woman on the front cover of a book in this store, but we can put them on we can show the spine of the book. It's that that's what you call implicit. Well, it's not implicit, it's explicit bias. And we do it all the time without even realizing that we're doing it. Now, when you become aware and you see that happen, you go to the clerk and you say, what's the deal here? Why aren't those books shown front page, front cover, just like these are? And she's young and she's foolish and she doesn't know what the hell is going on because she doesn't have to know. When you go up to the clerk to check out, and the woman ahead of you is a black woman, and she's in Denver, Colorado, and the clerk says I have to have 3 forms of identification before you can write that check. And I watch it, and I walk up behind her, and I start to write the check, and I say, is it all right if I write a check? Oh yeah, the information on top check of this right, the information on top of this check is right, isn't it? I say, wait a minute, give me back the check. And I take back the check, and I tear it into little pieces, and I sprinkle it on the desk, and I say, now, what you just did to that black woman was totally racist. This is a check from Iowa. She had a check from Denver, Colorado. You'll accept mine gladly, no problem. You wouldn't accept hers without 3 forms of identification. I don't do business with racist people, and you can take these books and put them where they'll do you the most good. And I left, and all those white folks behind me were really shocked. How dare I say that to that clerk? Well, how dare that clerk treat that black customer in that way? How dare we, as what we call good Christians, stand back and let that happen and either turn our heads so that we aren't witnessing it, or pretend that clerk has probably taken a bad check from that woman before. See, we have all this stuff, all these this mental nonsense that you have to go through in order to continue to perpetuate the myth of white superiority.
Right.
In winding,
I'm ranting.
No, there's no such thing as ranting. That's
in
not
the best
possible.
Now you're thinking, well, she sees racism in everything. I don't have to look for it. It's there.
It's there.
But you have to be aware of it, and black people are aware of it. And if you think that implicit biases aren't plain and simple to them, aren't obvious, you need to take another look. A black woman said to me last week, that's not implicit, that's explicit to me. I know when they turn away so they don't have to look at me. I know when they look at the ground instead of looking me in the eye. Those are not implicit, they are explicit to the ones who's on the receiving end of it. Excuse me. I'm busy, call back.
Well, there might be a reason why she's getting all these phone calls right now. They're looking at the show like, oh God, we got to shut her up. Ring the phone, call the number.
Shut her up.
Some of these are probably death threats. I get those all the time. I'm going to kill you.
It's probably,
they say the B
black
word,
identity people from the FBI. That's what it is, Jen. You've been identified as a black identity person.
And they call me the B word. But you see, for me, bitch is an acronym for being in total control, honey.
Oh gosh, am I going to be like that when I'm 84? I don't think so. I'm not sure if I'm going to be that good.
Right.
Last question.
If this wasn't X-rated before, it is now.
Last question. And that is, so Dr. Batalora, one of the things that you've been able to successfully do is basically take the work of Theodore Allen and Edgar Morgan, Edmund Morgan, and really bring to light the not just the invention of white people, but why, the legal reason that the word white was created, and that race had to be invented as a mechanism of control of a population of people. As I continue to study this work, study our history, both ancient history and American history, African history and American history, I keep coming to the conclusion of sociopathy and psychopathy of the folk that were responsible for the taking over this country,
right.
And that you have to be, let's say that you cannot be of sane mind and sound mind to institute laws that dehumanize and subjugate a people that millions of people will be born into and never know the difference. But even before that, you got to be crazy to come to a country of people that are already here and befriend them, and then come back and betray them and kill them and rape them. And so there's a certain level of sociopathy. And I'm working with various different doctors and various different people on my show and off my show in terms of the axiological understanding. Is this genetic, or is this socialization, or is it a combination of both as it relates to the European? However, as it relates to this development and designation of this legal designation of the term white people, which did not exist prior to 1681, that started to become in the consciousness of the legal community in 1664. When we look at this being born into something that took another 100 years to create this concept of race, like Jane was talking about earlier with Linnaeus and Blumenbach and so on and so forth, it seems like there's just a perpetuation of this psychopathic epigenetic or genetic memory of psychopathy that I'm struggling with in terms of what you were talking about, the either or the something and. Can this be evolved? Can we evolve out of this? Or is this something where it is either or, and it will forever be that way until perhaps the European no longer exist as a result of their birth dearth?
Well, I don't know if European explains it. I think greed explains it, and that Europeans have manifested the cognitive dissonance by creating the inferior other, the savage. That what Western culture, Western European cultures did prior to the arrival of their presence on the continent of North America was the education of the elite derived as much of it did from ancient Rome, provided a rationale as part of their so-called education that justified their treatment of people, their ability, or the ease, I should say, with which they viewed certain people as inferior. And so their training and education among the elite provided a mental framework to make that an easy thing to do. And so then when they came into colonial North America, it wasn't hard to then implement that framework of thinking in these ways that annihilated a Native American population and then enslaved women, children, moms, dads, grandparents stolen from Africa. And they could justify it pretty easily through those mental frameworks. And so, but why? How could they do that? You ask. Like, what could? Maybe those mental frameworks created a way for their brain to tell them it's okay because they're inferior, because they're savages, and I'm okay for treating them this way because I am elite and Christian and civilized, and the other framework that seemingly made that okay. So that
can it be okay? Hold on. Let me interrupt for a second. Could it also possibly be that when we're looking at, as Jane Elliott said in the beginning of this program, when we looked at the European coming out of the Ice Age, coming out of the caves, that it was also perhaps biological, axiological in terms of survival when they come out and there's a sea of population of pigmented people, that they're saying, oh my gosh, we will become extinct at some point if we do not have some level of cohesion and collusion amongst ourselves. And so therefore we must dominate the entire planet and rule over our women and so could it be that level of psychopathy became before
you need to talk to an expert in that field. I have no expertise in the area of genetics. What I can tell you,
what are your thoughts on it? I know you don't have expertise on it, but just in general, just what would be your thoughts on it?
I always turn to my training in sociology and law, and we're always looking at social constructionism as a principal way to understand most of what we experience in society. And so it's through that desire to attain wealth that I think is the principal motivator. I mean, think about it even today. Like, let's not even dig into that history. Today, am I going to hand over my real estate, the house that I purchased, that, you know, the bank owns it still, but eventually I'll own it, right? Am I going to hand it over to tribal people? My greed will allow me to justify why I'm not going to do that.
Jane Elliott?
Well, right now you don't have to, but in the future, unless we change our treatment of those who are different from ourselves, that could very easily happen. It happened when we, the white people, came into this country and took over what didn't belong to us because we had the power to do it. The main fear that I hear expressed by white people when I talk today is, if they get power, aren't they going to want to do to us what we've done to them? Mm-hmm. We had better hope, we had better pray. If you pray, you had better pray most religiously that people of color do not want to treat us the way we have treated them. They'll have that power in the future, and they will use that power as they have been taught to use that power, which is a bad idea. When we talk about these savages, remember the Aztecs and the pyramids, and compare that to Stonehenge. Now just think of that single example. People of color built the pyramids and believed that that God was the sun was a god, was God. Now today we realize that all energy we have on this earth comes to us from the sun. Perhaps the Aztecs were right. Now there's a really ugly thought. You see, we automatically assume that if our culture wasn't reflected in the cultures of other groups, that the other group's culture was wrong. So we have to be sure that we get them acculturated. And that's what we do in school. It's a bad idea. It's a really bad idea. And if you travel anywhere but in the United States, if you travel to those, as Mr. Trump calls them, the shit countries, you'll find out that they knew more then than we have learned yet. And we need to appreciate the things that they knew, and the things that one of the main differences, psychologists tell us, or sociologists tell us, that one of the main differences between white people and people of color is when white people come into a new environment, they immediately adjust the environment to fit their needs. When people of color come into a new environment, they immediately adjust their needs to fit the environment. It's called recognizing your power and recognizing what power you don't have, and refusing to recognize that you don't have the power to change the world. Maybe, just maybe, the people who knew how to live on this continent, on this, what we call America, which is not America, is the United States of America. America runs from the northernmost point on the north, of Canada to the southernmost point of South America. Those people are all Americans. We're going to build a wall to keep those Americans out of America. See, this is how shallow our learning is in this country. We are allowed, and we are encouraged, and we are reinforced in being ignorant. If you maintain this level of ignorance, you too can be president of the United States. And we have proof of that now. It's about power and the use and misuse of power. Right. Sorry, my presidents are showing there.
I didn't know that was coming. That was really good. That was really good. That was brilliant.
Just use, if you want to make an instant difference in people, compare the pyramids to Stonehenge. And which took a whole lot more intelligence and knowledge and expertise to do it. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Well, last question, Jane. Last question to you, Jane, and we talked about it in the green room. If you would be so kind, I saw the book, ladies and gentlemen, is a collar in my pocket. The Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes Exercise. It's an amazing book. It's a must-have, must-read, and a must-understanding for education. And what I loved the most and was most painful to read in this book was the acknowledgments that you gave to your children in particular, because they had to endure being children of a parent, a mother, who for many of us would say will go down in history in changing the minds of millions as a result of you showing up 54 years ago in presenting this work. Can you speak to us about some of the things that you have had to live through in terms of with your children?
Oh, what I've had to live through is nothing compared to what my children lived through. They were beaten, they were spit on, their belongings were destroyed, they were verbally and physically and psychologically abused by their peers, by their teachers, and by the parents of their peers because they had an N-word lover for a mother. And my children turned out just beautifully as far as I'm concerned. But now I have to relive that guilt for what I did because of what I did, what it did to my children. My oldest son is dying of cancer. And I think if what I had done, I hadn't done that, he wouldn't have had those stresses. He would have behaved in a different way. Maybe he wouldn't be in the situation he is. And that's unreal. And that's ridiculous. And that's stupid. And the two things are not connected. But he suffered enough when he was a kid. But what we suffered is nothing compared to what Black children suffer all day, every day. Absolutely nothing. Because that was a small group of people in Riceville, Iowa, doing it to my children. All we had to do was get them out of there. And they could go their happy way and not be recognized unless they happened to mention that I was their mother. Now, in the last 15 or 20 years, it's been a good thing to have me for a mother. And to be able to say, yeah, that's my mother. But my son, because he works on large equipment, said, Mom, keep a low profile when you come to my house because I could get killed on the job. The people I work with would not put up with having somebody who has a mother like you on the job with them. So it just goes on and on and on. Now, if I hadn't done the exercise, I wouldn't have to worry about it. I am responsible for what I now have to worry about. That's the way it is. You put your head above the parapet and somebody's going to try and shoot it off. So you can either decide to put your head above the parapet or you can stay beneath lower than the wall and let it go on. I don't have the right to just let it go on. My dad said you have a choice to make. You can either make a dollar or make a difference. My brothers became civil engineers. My sisters and I became teachers. They made the dollars. My sisters and I have made a difference.
Yes, you have.
Education is the answer to all these problems. Education is the answer to this problem.
The continuation of the dialogue with Jane Elliott and Dr. Jacqueline Battalora plunges us into the darkest corners of racial power dynamics, revealing a chilling tapestry woven with threads of genetic annihilation, systemic white supremacy, and the deliberate construction of a false sense of white superiority. It's a journey into the heart of a system designed to perpetuate inequality, a system that demands not just our understanding but our active resistance. Jane Elliott's blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment, though seemingly simple, serves as a potent allegory for the insidious nature of racial domination. It's a stark reminder of how easily arbitrary distinctions can be manipulated to create hierarchies and justify oppression. But the concept of genetic annihilation extends far beyond a classroom simulation. It speaks to a deep-seated fear, a historical anxiety rooted in the desire to erase the other. This isn't solely about physical extermination. It's about the systematic dismantling of cultural identity, the dilution of genetic heritage, and the erasure of Black presence and influence. It's the subtle and not-so-subtle ways in which white supremacist ideology seeks to diminish and eliminate Black communities, to render them invisible and insignificant. The conversation relentlessly underscores the systemic nature of white supremacy. It's not merely a matter of individual prejudice, though those instances are undeniably harmful. It's about the deeply embedded biases within our institutions, the policies and practices that perpetuate inequality even in the absence of overt bigotry. It's about the subtle, often invisible ways in which whiteness is normalized and centered, while Blackness is marginalized and excluded. This systemic control permeates every facet of our society. It shapes our legal systems, our educational institutions, our economic structures, and our cultural narratives. It explains why Black people are disproportionately incarcerated, why they face barriers to quality education and healthcare, why their contributions are often overlooked or erased. It is the invisible architecture that maintains the status quo. The discussion illuminates the constructed nature of whiteness, revealing it as a social and legal invention designed to create a privileged class. The term white people isn't a natural descriptor, it's a tool of division, a means of establishing a hierarchy. This manufactured identity fosters a sense of entitlement, a belief that white people are inherently superior to black people. The implications of this constructed identity are far-reaching. It creates a psychological divide, justifying oppression and reinforcing a culture of dominance. It's the foundation upon which systemic white supremacy rests, the invisible force that shapes our perceptions and interactions. The conversation exposes the role of education in perpetuating white supremacy. The elite education system, far from being a neutral purveyor of knowledge, serves to reinforce a mental framework of white superiority. It's about instilling a sense of entitlement, a belief that white people are destined to lead and control. This system doesn't merely impart information. It shapes worldviews. It reinforces narratives that center whiteness, that minimize the contributions of black people, and that justify the ongoing oppression of marginalized communities. It's about creating a psychological foundation for white dominance, a belief that white people are inherently more intelligent, more capable, and more deserving of power. Education as the antidote, a call to radical learning. Jane Elliott's unwavering assertion, "Education is the answer to all these problems," resonates with a profound truth. But this isn't about conventional education. It's about radical learning, a transformative process that challenges dominant narratives and empowers individuals to dismantle systems of oppression. Radical education must encompass several key elements. Decolonizing the curriculum, we must dismantle the Eurocentric bias that permeates our educational systems. This involves centering the voices and experiences of marginalized communities, acknowledging the contributions of black scholars, artists, and activists, and exposing the historical roots of white supremacy. Teaching the true history of race and racism, we must confront the brutal realities of slavery, Jim Crow, and systemic racism. This involves teaching the legal and social construction of whiteness, the history of racial violence, and the ongoing impact of white privilege. Fostering critical thinking and media literacy, we must equip students with the tools to analyze information, challenge assumptions, and identify bias. This includes teaching media literacy, critical thinking skills, and the ability to deconstruct dominant narratives. Promoting empathy and understanding, we must create spaces where students can engage in meaningful dialogue across racial and cultural lines. This involves fostering empathy, promoting understanding, and challenging stereotypes. Empowering students as agents of change, we must empower students to become active participants in the struggle for racial justice. This involves teaching them about social justice movements, providing opportunities for community engagement, and encouraging them to use their voices to advocate for change. Challenging the white Jesus narrative. Education must directly address the appropriation of religious figures and the use of religion to justify oppression. This includes promoting a deeper understanding of the historical and cultural context of religious narratives and challenging the use of religion to maintain power structures. In the face of these formidable challenges, the black community must adopt a multi-pronged approach to dismantle the architecture of erasure, reclaim and reassert our narrative. We must actively reclaim our history, our culture, and our identity. We must challenge the dominant narratives that seek to erase our contributions and minimize our experiences. We must amplify the voices of black scholars, artists, and activists who are working to reclaim our heritage, build and strengthen our institutions. We must invest in the development of strong, independent black institutions that can serve as centers of community, education, and economic empowerment. This includes supporting black-owned businesses, schools, and cultural organizations. Educate and empower our youth. We must ensure that our children receive a comprehensive and accurate education that reflects the richness and complexity of black history and culture. We must empower them with the knowledge and skills they need to challenge systemic racism and build a better future. Engage in political action. We must actively participate in the political process, advocating for policies that promote racial equity and justice. We must hold our elected officials accountable and demand that they address the systemic issues that perpetuate inequality. Cultivate community and solidarity. We must strengthen our bonds of community and solidarity, supporting each other in the face of adversity. We must build networks of mutual aid and support, creating spaces where we can heal, grow, and thrive. Economic empowerment. We must promote economic self-sufficiency and empowerment within the black community. This includes supporting black-owned businesses, promoting financial literacy, and advocating for policies that address economic inequality. The struggle for racial justice is a long and arduous one. But by embracing radical education, reclaiming our narrative, building our institutions, and empowering our communities, we can dismantle the architecture of erasure and create a future where all people are treated with dignity and respect.